So today I'm gonna reverse engineer the Walking Dead intro and try to do my own version of it. So we're gonna do something that looks like this. Alright, so let's get started here. This is going to be an exercise in a little bit of 2D and 3D, so we'll start with a new solid here. And this solid, we will have sort of a beige color to it, just going based on the their original version. And immediately I'll go ahead and make a new camera, and I will, one node, let's go ahead and do 35mm. At this point, let's disable depth of field, hit OK. And I'm also going to work in two views, so I'll switch this to two views horizontal, and that way we'll have the same scene just from two different perspectives. On the left we'll do a custom view, which is just another name for perspective, and on the right will be our camera. So I'm going to start with just bringing in a ground texture, and this is all stuff I found on a simple a Google image search. I'll put that into my scene. I will make it 3D, and I will rotate it 90 degrees on the X-axis. So just for starters, we have a nice ground plane here to develop our scene. I'll go ahead and zoom out using the Unify Camera tool and get a better idea as to what's happening here. I will also raise my camera a little bit on the Y-axis just so I can see my ground plane from an angle. And I will also at this point bring in a actually I was gonna bring in a light, but I'm just gonna start building my scene first, then I'll bring in a light, and that way everything stays lit. So let's go ahead and bring one of our first objects, which is this simple tree. Again, Google image search will put this in the center, and if I double click on the tree to go to its layer mode, I do want to move its anchor point to the bottom, something like that. And if you look at our scene here, it's a little bit too, the ground is a little bit too small for our scene here, especially since the tree is quite large. So I am going to resize the ground. I'll just click on it, stretch out its width and depth here, and let's zoom out, and let's see, and then I'll just basically, I'm probably gonna have to resize this a couple more times, but for right now this should be okay. I'm gonna move this a little bit forward towards my camera. So I'm just gonna populate this scene, and I'm gonna try to create sort of like a scene that has a couple of trees. If you look at the original image or the original animation here, this kind of first part, it just has a couple of trees, a couple of rocks, some grass layers, and a mound here. So I'll try to build this up. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to move this tree back a little bit, maybe to the side, and let's duplicate that. This one I will move here and a little forward. And you know, if you are trying to do your own version of this, feel free to populate your scene any way you like. There is no wrong way to populate your own scene. And I will go ahead and duplicate this tree again. Maybe move to the other side here, maybe a little bit more back. Maybe this one I will move forward. And maybe I'll move the other one towards the back. I'm trying my best here not to sound like an After Effects Bob Ross here with these happy trees. Okay, so maybe like this. Maybe I'll move my camera back as well, just so I can have a better view here. Okay, and then I'll start bringing just more stuff. So let's bring in this thing I renamed Mound, and bring that into my top layer here. I'll double click on that. I will move the anchor point down towards the bottom, and I will also get rid of the sky and the surrounding trees in this particular object here. Maybe something like that. Now let's feather this a little bit, just so it's not such a hard edge, maybe a 3. And let's see what it looks like in our scene here as I make it 3D. Alright, so it kind of put everything towards the center. I want to move that forward a little bit, maybe to the other side as well. And now the thing with this mound here is obviously we see a sharp edge here. So masks to the rescue here. I will go ahead and get this in position first, and then I will play around with some masks, and maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller as well, and make it more coming out of the ground perhaps. Alright, smaller. Okay, so here we sort of see our layout. If I rotate around here, I'll move this forward just a little bit, and let's take a look. Let's move the camera back just so we get everything in the shot here. Okay, so that's not too bad. We've got the mound kind of creeping in, and what I will do is I am going to go into the mounds or mound layer, and I will add another mask here at the bottom. Maybe something like this, just something that's not perfectly straight. And this one I will set to subtract, so I can smooth that out by, or rather feather it out by feathering. Maybe something like this. And then at this point it might be a little bit too low. Click on the mask path. Let's move this up so it actually makes a difference. And something like that. Sort of a nice fade into the ground there. Okay, so I'm going to continue building up my scene here, and I'll add some rocks, maybe some grass layers, and build that up. So that's what I'm going to do next. So let's add in a couple of grass layers. Here's a grass PNG. Again, PNG files found on Google image search. And where is the anchor point here? Let's see. Should be right there. Okay, move that towards the bottom. I will make this 3D and put this whole grass layer, perhaps. Maybe I'll put one. I could put one behind the mound as well as in the front. So let's try that. Let's see what that looks like. And again, I'll probably have to move this up. That's a little bit too large, so let's bring that down height-wise. And we could also stretch this thing non-uniformly, maybe something like this. Bring that down. And you know, a lot of these, since they're from different sources, a lot of them need to be kind of color corrected. And I'm going to wait on that because I think a lot of this I can fix with an adjustment layer. But just so that, you know, if you're worried about that, don't. We will have a desaturation here at some point, and you know, we will adjust as needed here. Okay, so I'm going to raise this up just a little bit, the grass layer that is, and let's see how far we can make it go. So actually, again, we're getting a hard edge here, but I'm not going to worry about it right now because I can always fix that with a mask. But let's go ahead and make this still smaller, at least in terms of its height. Maybe like that. Okay, so that's one there. I will duplicate that and maybe put one in the front of the mound as well. And maybe I'll kind of move it just a little bit so it's not so identical, even though technically they are identical. And I'll move this even further towards my camera here. Something like that, perhaps. Go back to the camera. Let's move this out a little more. So at this point I can move out, see where my starting point might be, and I can readjust my trees and other objects just so that they're better lined up, I guess. And so that looks okay. So what I'm going to do here at this point is, to keep things moving along here, I'm actually going to make a camera movement. So the way I like to do my camera movements is I don't want to move the camera necessarily, but I do want to move a null instead. So some of you might have played around with this idea of camera rigs. I'm not going to do a really complex one, but the idea is you want to move your camera as much as possible like a real world camera. So what I'll do here is I'll rename this null, maybe a dolly null, and then make it 3D. And what I want to do is have my null be the same exact place as my camera. So I will select the camera position data, or just rather click on the word position, Command C, Command V on the dolly. That way it moves the null. I can make it a different color so it's a little bit more visible, I guess. Right to the camera, and then I will parent the camera to the dolly. So what that's going to do is, rather than moving the camera, it's going to move the dolly as the first camera movement. So let's do that. Let's make a keyframe at frame 0. Maybe we'll go in a little bit like so. And then maybe 4 seconds out. Let's just do 4.0. I will push this out maybe to about there. Okay, so if I play this back, obviously I have some problems. I have a gap that develops right where the camera lands at the 4-second mark, okay, which is predicted. So at this point I will in fact rearrange some of these other layers. I could just stretch this one out. That's probably the easier solution. Go to my other grass layer and also do the same. So now if I play this back, we shouldn't see any gaps. Now this one in the front here, this grass in the front, you know, maybe I can raise that. I am getting a hard edge here, and the reason why I'm not so worried about that at this point is because I am going to add a light that might make some of these hard edges not so dominant here. So let's actually try that. So I will grab a new light. New light, okay, and I'm just going to start with a pretty basic light. I do want it to cast shadows. These are sort of my properties based on the last light I made, and I'll just bring him in. I'm probably going to change some of these. Hit OK, and what I will do is I'm going to arrange my light so it's lined up with my camera, and I'm going to do this in my left side here. So I'll go to left view. Let me zoom out, and so I can see my camera. And I'm just going to grab this light, and maybe I'll just move it back in my Z-axis here. Z-axis. There we go. And I'm going to move it sort of where my camera is, and then I'll move it on my Y-axis up. Something like this, okay? And again, I'll adjust as needed. So what this basically is going to do is I'm also going to parent my spotlight to that same null that's driving the camera. So I'm just going to do that right now. There we go. And so basically what's going to happen is, as the camera moves, the light also moves. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I like things to sort of be less visible in terms of light as the camera moves out, trying to mimic that original Walking Dead sequence, which again you can find online. artofthetitle.com is the place where I found it. And now if I play this back, I'm getting some light focus here. Now, what may be happening here is my cone angle might be a little bit too large, so I will lower that a little bit. Not too much, maybe something like this. And for right now, I think I'm good. So let's go ahead and take a look at the camera view here. I'll render this really quick. And not bad. Again, I'm still seeing those edges of the grass, and maybe we'll deal with that in a little bit. but that's not a big deal. I'll go ahead and easy ease this camera move. And let's also save. I just want to make sure we're all saving, so if anything crashes. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if you look at the footage here, we get this nice sort of grungy overlay here, and this camera moves in sort of erratic staccato motion. So let's try to recreate that. And the way I'm going to do that is with an adjustment layer. So new adjustment layer, and put that all the way on top. Okay. The first adjustment layer, I'm just going to do a couple of quick color correction things. I will do a hue saturation, bring down the overall saturation of my whole scene here, and let's make another adjustment layer. This one I'll add color correction, curves, and bring down the whole brightness of this a little bit. Good thing about curves is if you grab a mask like this ellipse tool, double click on it, we can make a sort of a vignette here. So I'll feather that, and now I have a nice vignette that's helping me out as the camera goes away from the scene, from the back. So let's try to add that interesting camera motion here. And again, I will do that with an adjustment layer. So new adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put onto this adjustment layer a effect called Posterized Time. And what this is going to do, if I go to my settings here, I'm going to try 10, is as the camera moves out, you know, the motion is going to get sort of posterized in the sense that it's going to skip, or rather adjust itself from my original 24 frames per second to about 10 frames a second. So we get this little bit of a staccato move. Now this is going to be a lot more evident if I do one main thing, and that is on my camera position I will add an expression, one of my favorite expressions as well as yours, I'm sure, wiggle 10, 10. Let's try that. So what this is going to do is create some randomness in the X, Y, and Z position properties of the camera. So as I move out here, not only am I getting this sort of staccato effect, I'm also having my camera move randomly. So it kind of looks like this. If I play this back in full speed, this is actually still rendering or previewing. But if I play this back, I'm getting this kind of an effect. So I might play around with that, but that's generally what I'm going to do to make that erratic camera movement. Put the posterized time on your adjustment layer, and then have your camera go into the wiggle expression. And again, we can adjust that as needed. Now, one other thing that I will do is, if you go back and look at the original footage here that I showed, is you have this sort of noise here, or this grungy noise, and for that all I simply did was grab some of these grunge patterns that I found on Google search, and I basically made a new composition for them. So I'm going to grab, for example, this one, drag it into new composition. I don't have to be in two views, and here I just went ahead and grabbed the rest of them. There should be about 5 total. So 5 different grunge patterns, and you can look at them separately. They all kind of somewhat similar. So and some of them are smaller than the composition size, which is not a problem. Then I went ahead and made this whole entire duration of this thing into exactly 10 frames. Okay, not 10 seconds, but 10 frames. Therefore, this allows me now to make each one of these exactly 2 frames. So if we stack these up with our friend, the keyframe assistant sequence layers, hit OK, we get a nice sort of cut to cut to cut of each one of these noise grunge frames. A couple of them need to be resized like this one, so I'll just go ahead and do that. Just make sure you're going towards the edge, and these seem to be okay. So now we've got this pattern here, and what I did before is I just rendered this out. So render this out to a QuickTime file, and here it is already made. And so what it looks like is basically this. Let me just play it here. Okay, so it's basically, let me put this in the top here. It's basically just a repeating pattern. Okay, now the way I made it repeat is if you right click on this, interpret footage main, down here at the bottom you can loop this as many times as you want. I did 40 just to be safe. Okay, then I simply, whoops, just shut that down. Where is my, there it is. So then in my main composition here, I went ahead and brought that to the very top and set its blend mode to multiply, and lowered the opacity just a little bit so it's not so harsh, maybe about 60 or so. And then if I hit playback, you can see that pattern all the way on top of my footage here in my layers. Okay, so combine that with this erratic camera motion, you start to get something that looks like this. Okay, so again, we can adjust things as I'm looking at this. For example, I might go to my spotlight, and maybe I will do increase the cone angle just a little bit more. So mess around with the fall off here just a little bit, maybe make it a little brighter, and again kind of salt to taste here. So let's go ahead and deal with this grass here. That is kind of bothering me. So I'm just going to simply grab that layer. I believe it's this one or this one. Let's see, I think it is that one. Yep, and then I will do another mask for this just to soften up the edge at the bottom there. So I'll just do a random kind of shape here. Okay, again set that to subtract feather. You gotta love the subtract and feather thing. It helps solve a lot of problems. And let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so here I might even do this right in my viewport here. Maybe stretch this up a little bit just to grab a bottom section of that. So if I play this back again, it has a nice sort of feathered edge at this point. And this mound here looks like it could use a little bit of feathering as well, a little bit more feathering. So let's go ahead and feather the original mask on that. Okay, again, just a couple of quick fixes on this layout here in this world here that I'm creating. So if I play this whole thing, not the whole thing, but just maybe the first couple seconds here, let's see what we get here. Okay, not bad. Now here at this point, I do want to go ahead and turn on some depth of field, and I will make this pretty low number here. Let's try 1.0 at first, and just FYI in that the lower the number, the more depth of field, or I'm sorry, the lower the number, the more shallow depth of field. Let's try even a 0.7, the old Stanley Kubrick 0.7 lens. And now at least some of these elements that are away from my camera are moving, and they're also getting out of focus. Now I am going to get a render hit, so let's move this maybe to half resolution, and let's see if we can get better playback here, and we can. Okay, so far so good. Again, I don't have to necessarily have anything the way it is. I can always go back, and again, this time I'll turn off my spotlight, and maybe I'll take this tree in the back here, and let's just make it a little bit larger. Another reason why I made the anchor point down there, because it makes this kind of readjustment a little bit easier. So there we go. Okay, so there's our first camera move, and we can almost call this part 1, where we have our first scene there. I'll go ahead and deal with this grass layer as well, or rather I'll just delete this grass, duplicate the one I just corrected in the back, and move a copy of it forward, kind of where I had the other one. That way I don't have to deal with another grass hard edge. Okay, looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and make the second part of this. So the first movement we had for the camera at any rate was 4 seconds. So maybe we'll go to another 4-second increment, the 8-second mark, and let's move this camera even more back. You know, maybe the same distance. Like so. Again, I'll turn off my light so I can see what's happening in this view. And let's zoom out here. I might need to get a little more ground, so I'll stretch this out. And so maybe at this point, again, I'm referencing the first footage I showed you guys. We'll add a couple of these small mountains to the to this next section. So let's grab this mountain image here. Again, it's just something that looks like that. I'm mainly going to use these two sections, these two peaks. And let's go ahead and just bring that in to our scene here. I'll put everything below all these adjustment layers. Double click. That's not the mountain. That's the mountain. And move my anchor point down to the bottom, like so. Well, not the bottom, but I would say somewhere like this, because I'm not going to use this part of it. And let's take a look. If we set this now to 3D. Okay, so here is the mountain, and it's really small for a mountain, but let's see what happens when we bring it closer. And I will make this larger. So S for scale, make that larger. And I'll move this thing so it's kind of in the back, obviously, because I don't want it in the first part of this. So let's do that. And let's just move that here. And I could keep it like this, but I kind of want to separate these two. So maybe what I'll do is grab a pen tool here and just do, you know, maybe this one like this. And just have this one separate from the other one. So if I duplicate this, I could have these two separate. So this one I will change the mask. So let's just use this part of the second one. And again, I'm not really concentrating too much on the original mask because we can always adjust it. So I'll just make these rough masks. Alright, so let's move this forward, or actually let's move the other one forward. The one on the left. Let's move this one forward a little bit. And this one will move to the left to hide its apparent edge there. So just what I'm basically doing is just separating out, get a little bit more parallax that way so that these are not so on top of each other there. And I could even just take this one. Actually, I will do that. I'm going to take this one and move it to the left. Okay, so that we're entering a mountainous area here, a mountainous region, I guess. And let's make this one larger. Okay, so this one, the one in the back, I do want to specifically place that there because that's going to be a nice resting spot for my skull. So this guy right here, we're going to put that skull on this back mountain. Okay, so let's try that. I'm going to grab my layer here called skull something. Did I call it yeah, here it is, skull. And again, we'll do the same exact thing, make it 3D. I'll go ahead and double click, move its anchor point down to sort of the bottom just for easier rotation and movement. And I will take the position data of this mountain, copy it to the position data of the skull to make life easier. And now the skull is more or less in the same vicinity. So if I raise this guy up, he'll be sitting right there on the mountain peak. Okay, and what's a good skull scene without a pitchfork going through the skull? We all know that from our, well, just from the original title sequence, I guess. So I'm going to grab the pitchfork PNG file, and I will do more or less the same exact thing. Move that right where the skull is. Copy and paste position data. With the pitchfork, I will do another anchor point reposition, and I will at this point raise this guy up. It's a very large pitchfork. Let's make it smaller, and let's also rotate it so it's more or less facing straight up. Let's do it on the x-axis. Yeah, x-axis. Is that the x-axis? Yeah, that should be the x-axis. No, sorry, z-axis. Okay, now we're talking, and let's drag this to where the skull is, and kind of reposition that as needed. Might be a little small now, so let's make that a little bit larger. There we go. So now we've got our camera moving back, revealing the skull and the mountains that they're resting on, or it's resting on. And that could be our next sort of camera move. So let's go ahead and turn back on the spotlight. Let's see if we can do another preview here. Okay, camera goes out, and it kind of goes out and reveals the skull here. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. So one thing I will do, again, this is something that you just have to do a little trial and error, is it looks like I'm moving a little slow here, and more importantly, I'm going to take out this middle keyframe because I just want to have that one movement so that the first camera movement reveals the skull. Maybe I'll do that at the 5-second mark. So I'll push this here, and let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think I kind of like the timing of that a little better, rather than having it pause like I had it before. Okay, it looks pretty good to me. Okay, so maybe what I will do at this point is I want to see more of this mountain. So maybe what I'll do is I can either move some of these mountains forward, or what I probably can do is go to my other view here, click on left view again, and you know, if I want to know where my mountain is, or my mountains, I guess, there they are right here. So they're kind of back here, so that's why the light's not really hitting on them. So I could retime this or whatever, but I think the easiest solution is just to grab the spotlight and move it back behind the camera a little bit. Now this will change a couple things, but I don't think it'd be too much of a hassle here. So let's take a look at that. So the light just happens to be a little behind the camera, but I think more or less we're getting the same similar effect here. And this way, as the camera goes into the area where the skull is, it will also reveal the mountains. All right, so that's going to be now technically I can call this part 1. So part 2 will be going from this skull scene to this kind of flash, and then we go to, I guess, part 2 with this shack and this tree here. So let's see what we can do there. Now, the key to this is we're going to cut on the flash. We're going to use the flash as a cheat to transition to the next section here. So the way I do this is, again, with our best friend, the adjustment layer. So what I'm going to do is, as this camera comes to a stop on this first or second keyframe here, I will make a new adjustment layer. So, and by the way, actually I was going to put that below my my grunge kind of loop here, but I'm going to actually put this above instead. Or actually, no, that's fine. I can put it right here. The main thing you want to avoid is putting the flash below, because that's going to get messed up by your posterized time. Your keyframes will look weird and inaccurate if you put this next adjustment layer below the posterized time. So right here, I'm just going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and this one I'm simply going to apply Curves Correction, crank it way up. You don't have to go all the way to white, but just kind of close. And as I hit this keyframe, I will go ahead and mess with this. So let's make a keyframe here. Let's go forward 2 frames and hit reset, and that's going to make a keyframe, believe it or not, for the reset. So it kind of flashes. Now I do need to go a couple of frames, 2 frames back, make an exact keyframe 2 frames back, and reset. So basically what I'm doing is I'm starting from 0 in terms of the effect, flash, and then back to 0. So let's see what that looks like. There we go. So it's a nice sort of flash keyframe there that allows us to hide the first scene. Now I might need to make this longer, so I'm going to select these keyframes, hold down the Option key, and drag them in a sort of same ratio forward here to get that a little bit slower. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to not only hide that transition, I'm going to streamline my scene here a little bit. So I'm going to grab everything that went to that first scene. So except maybe, let's say, the ground. Now I'll grab the ground as well. And I will go into my pre-compose. So pre-compose, call this part 1, and everything gets messed up. But if I click on this magic button here and here, everything's back to normal. And the reason why I'm doing this, other than the fact that it cleans up my timeline, is now on that flash, I don't have to trim each one of those layers individually. I can just click on part 1, Option right bracket, and adjust this one back, 1 frame, trim it back, and now when it flashes, I get a nice clean canvas here for my next section, okay, which will be called, appropriately enough, part 2. Okay, so here I'm just going to, again, going back into the original footage here, I'm just going to keep moving the camera back as I add these 2 additional or 3 additional elements here, the birds, the shack, and this tree here, all from a Google image search once again. Okay, let's do that. So let's go ahead and start with the shack here. So I'll switch my left to custom view 1, and I'll just go ahead and start placing my items in. So let's go ahead and actually, before we do that, I'm going to make yet another camera move just to see how far back I can move this. So first camera move was 5 seconds. Maybe this time I'll do 4 seconds. Let's go to 9-second mark, and we'll just move back our camera here. I might even temporarily kind of see where my other part 1 is, so just so I know where to put the camera. Okay, so maybe sorry, not the camera, but the actual shack. So where is the shack? The shack is right here, And let's go ahead and put that guy right above part 1. Same exact workflow. Grab the anchor point, put it down here at the bottom somewhere, make it 3D, and it wants to go towards the origin, so I will bring this where my camera is instead. Again, this is going to take a little bit of trial and error, just so that when I move this camera back, so let's go to frame 9 seconds that is. Let's go ahead and move the dolly back, perhaps like that. And now I can grab my shack here and reposition it. And I'm probably going to get this wrong the first time, because I always get it wrong the first time. So let's move it here. Maybe I'll crank up the scale. And now I can bring it down a little bit. So let's see what that movement is. Now, obviously, I'm seeing the shack here in my part 1, so I do want to make sure that that's not a problem. Let's move the shack closer to the camera so that at least it, in this first part, won't be a problem. So let's go forward from here. It should flash. And it's a problem. So what I'm going to have to do is, let's just trim this thing so it's not visible until we need it to be. So after the flash is ideal, so right around there, maybe even there. Let's go ahead and move our starting point for the shack. So let's see what's going on. So here is the flash, and the shack appears. Now the shack is either too large or too close to the camera. Let's see where it is and what's going on. I think it's both, so let's make it smaller. This is the part I meant by me usually getting it wrong the first time. So make it smaller still. And we might even just move the camera back a little more on that second movement so that it travels farther, so that the shack has some more time there. So let's try that. Okay, so let's go ahead and make the shack smaller still. All right, and then maybe we will actually, no, I'll take that back. I'm going to actually land on that second keyframe, and then I'll just do it from here. So I'm actually going to make it larger again. I'm actually going to make it larger again, and I'll move this back towards the bottom. So let's see what happens now. Okay, so maybe something like that. You know, I might not want this thing so much towards the center, so maybe I'll move the shack to the other side a little bit. And when the camera does its thing, it kind of will reveal that part of it right there. Let's take a look at the original. Yeah, I think that's what I was doing here as well. Something kind of similar idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and just build this part 2 really quick here. So this part 2 is going to have basically 3 elements: the shack, the tree. I'm going to turn off my light just so I can see a little bit better. And let's grab this kind of tree that I found that I thought it was kind of spooky, and I should have probably labeled this a little better, but here it is. I called it tree 3B, so let's bring that in. Make it 3D. Double click, grab its anchor point. So pretty much everything we have been doing in the past, bringing it back down. So that things are easier for me, I'm just going to do the same thing I've been doing, and that is copying the position data from the one object and putting it into the other object. And now these things are pretty much in the same place. And I can also, just so that things are lined correctly, I'll go to where my shack was originally brought in and also move the tree starting point to the same place. So now these things should be more or less kind of tied to each other. Now this will allow me to do now is grab the tree, move it perhaps to the other side, maybe a little bit forward on my z-axis. Bring it up, perhaps smaller. As you can obviously see here, it's kind of like almost impossible to get this exactly the way you want immediately. So maybe at this point, yeah, that's actually better to have done this closer to the second camera or the third camera keyframe here. So maybe like this. And I'm just going to reference what I did here. Yeah, perhaps something like that. Okay, so if I turn on my spotlight, it should be a little bit more dark here, and let's play this back. Okay, so I've moved this tree back, separated from the shack here, and I could keep it out of focus like this. It looks kind of cool, perhaps, so I will just move it a little bit to the right, like this. So if I play this next section back, now I have that flash going into the second section here, and various items appear. Alright, I might even, again, just timing wise, I might even have this tree come in earlier. So I'll push it forward and try that perhaps. Let's see what we got. Yeah, I think I kind of like that a little better. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the final element here, and that is going to be the birds here. So I'm just going to grab birds here and again bring them in. Put that. Now with the birds, I'll put them sort of behind the shack here. So I'll make them 3D as well. Again, saving some time. Copy some position data to the birds here. I don't really see them, so let's turn off the spotlight and see where they are. It looks like they're behind the shack here. So maybe what I'll do is raise this up. I can also turn this view to transparency and see what's going on. Okay, a lot of birds, very big. So I'll make those smaller. And I will move them down so I can actually see them. Smaller still. And let's go ahead and also push them here in the timeline so that they're all kind of lined up with the other two parts of this part 2. Alright, now these birds would be better if they moved, so let's go ahead and move them. Let's scale them down just a little more, and I'll go ahead and start kind of moving them right after that flash just a little bit later. So let's move the birds off to one side first. Let's see where they come in. Let's see. Always problem with the birds. Always causing problems. I think I'm just going to move them back more behind the shack. So let's move them on the z-axis back more, just like that. And then I will move them off left, keyframe that whole thing, go a couple of seconds forward, and then I will drag that to the other side. So let's see what we have here. Okay, and the whole kind of staccato movement of the camera helps sell the idea that they're not or that actually that they are flapping their wings, because clearly that they're not. So what's better than one layer of birds, and that is 2 layers of birds. So let's grab birds, duplicate that thing, and this one will move up. Now what you don't want to do is just drag up, because you'll make an additional keyframe, which you don't want to do. Instead, you want to land on a keyframe. So let's say the first one here. So if we click on the birds duplicate, hit the letter J to go back to its first keyframe, click the word position, which selects both of these guys, and then I could raise this up and the whole thing moves up. And just for good measure, let's offset them as well so their duplicate goes later. There we go. Okay, so now let's turn on the spotlight and we will play forward. Alrighty, and there we go. So let's play this from the beginning. I'm gonna go to my one view here. Now, I'm not going to turn on full mode because that will slow down the preview here, but at some point I turned on the full resolution, turned on some motion blur for some of these elements, and I think motion blur helped a little bit as well. And then that was the final sequence. So here it is. So at any point you can always readjust, obviously, as needed. So for example, on this one called this adjustment layer that I'm using as a vignette, for example, I could decrease the mask feathers so I'm getting a sharper edge. I could even make the vignette a little darker around, whatever you have to do to customize your end here. But that's pretty much it. And I'll play back the final rendered version of this. All right, thanks very much. I'm glad you guys are here for the first episode. I'm going to continue doing these, hopefully pretty regularly. So if you have anything you want me to reverse engineer, just comment, like, subscribe, do whatever you need to. All right, thanks guys.